Well, hello, kindred spirits. I hope that y'all are doing great this evening. I was digging through some of my old books earlier today, and I came across this book that I've had since childhood. This was actually my parents' book, and I've read it over and over throughout the years. And I thought, you know what? My friends would really enjoy hearing a story or two from this book. Now, it's called The Bell Witch of Tennessee, and it's written by Charles Bailey Bell, and he was a descendant of the Bell family. So, if you were a kid in Tennessee growing up in the 70s and 80s, like I was, your childhood was probably just permeated with stories of the Bell Witch. And this all took place in a little town called Adams, Tennessee, which was west of where I lived. And so, especially around Halloween time, kids would start telling stories about the Bell Witch. And I remember there was somebody told me one time that if you dialed 7 sevens on the phone, you get the Bell Witch. All you got was the Bell South operator, but it was fun to try. But it's fascinating to me, ghost stories, and I think that some of y'all will enjoy hearing it too. But now let me warn you, if you're a scaredy cat, turn this off, because it's probably going to scare you, because there's some good spooky stories in here, and most of it, they say it's all true. These things really happen. There's a lot of documentation from lots of different people who experienced this, including Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson. So let's read a couple of chapters out of this. I think it'll be fun. So this is from the preface. For many years, articles have appeared in many magazines and newspapers giving sensational stories regarding the so-called Bell Witch. During the last year or two, these articles have appeared very frequently. I presume the cause for the more frequent articles, some in serial form, has been that it was the time claimed for another promised visit from the witch. Such articles have even appeared in European papers, so I've been told. The author so many times has had inquiries from different parts of the country, from New York to the western coast, asking his opinion of the witch, that he knows thousands of people are very much interested at this time in getting the best information obtainable regarding one of the greatest mysteries the world has ever known. Wherever he's been, from California to the East Coast, down in Mexico, in the South or North, he's been asked if he were one of the Bells of the Bell Witch family. In answer to all these inquiries, he has followed the actions of his ancestors and not given any information worthwhile. The members of the Bell family have talked very little, even to their own families, and practically not at all to strangers or friends regarding this mystery. The name Bell Witch has always been resented by the family. They are sensitive to such an appellation. The Bell Witch was not the old woman kind that was known so well in the East and Europe many years ago, and in many instances burned at the stake. Neither was it the kind that could be punished in any way. With all its tangible actions, it had the faculty of vanishing instantly. The author shall relate in this book what was handed down to him by his father, Dr. J.T. Bell, he having the recollections of his father, John Bell, Jr. Joel Thomas Bell was the eldest son of John Bell, Jr. He was born April 13th, 1831 in Robertson County and died March 30th, 1910. He resembled his father very much, being a man of striking appearance, 6 feet 2 inches tall, broad-shouldered, and of extraordinary intellectual appearance. After a good literary education, he studied medicine, entering the medical department of the University of Nashville in 1853, and graduating from that institution after the usual course of lectures then required. He began the practice of medicine at his home, his father's house, within a few hundred yards of the old home site of his grandfather, John Bell. He married Laura Virginia Henry, daughter of Captain Lemuel Henry of Robertson County. His home was built on land given him by his father. The farm now belongs to the author. He practiced medicine 50 years at Adams. He established an extensive practice and was highly regarded as a diagnostician by every doctor who asked for his services in consultation. Many people now living in Robertson County and adjoining counties remember him with genuine pleasure. He followed the rule of the older Bells. If he told anything at all, it was always the truth. No one who knew him ever doubted his word in anything. I doubt if anyone other ever heard him speak of the Bell Witch voluntarily during his life. The time didn't seem proper to him. He gave these recollections to me with the same admonition given to him by his father. The spirit talked to his father on other important topics of the day and told of the happenings of the past which no one had ever heard, and prophesied what was to be expected in the future, much of which has happened. My father knew many people, relatives and friends, who had talked to the witch, but advised me that the confidential conference between the witch and his father were the most amazing experience to which any human being had ever been subject. And not only the Bell family, but the whole world would finally be interested. My father had no superstitious ideas. Of the many physicians who had called him in consultation and met him for years, not one ever had an idea of what he really thought of the witch. He impressed them at once that he felt indignant any person of intelligence had ever called the visitor Bell Witch, and that sometimes it would be known that it was, and he hoped it would be understood that he was certain when it returned on its promised visit it would not be limited to the Bell family, but the whole country would share in the honor, and he hoped that they would profit by their experience. My great-aunt Betsy Bell Powell, daughter of John Bell, suffered great punishment from the witch. I saw her when I was 19 years old while on a visit to Mississippi, where she lived with her daughter, Mrs. Zadok Bell. She was then about 83 years old, and she gave me the most graphic account of the activities of the witch. A chapter will be devoted to her experiences. I've seen a number of reliable persons who came in contact with the witch, and scores of others who had relatives and friends who heard its voice and witnessed its pranks. With the exception of Aunt Betsy, I didn't ask for their experience. They related it themselves. I shall write of what I've learned, leaving out the common witch stories presented for the past 100 years. More than 40 years ago, a book was published on the so-called Bell Witch, which included a manuscript by Richard Williams Bell, a younger brother of John Bell, Jr. My father and other members of the Bell family protested vigorously against this publication, not believing the time had come for any publication about the witch. My father declined emphatically to disclose anything he knew, telling me at the time his father's recollections, when published, were such as would grieve our most intelligent people, that would give our most intelligent people an insight into the spirit world. He said that he thought Richard Williams' manuscript was true, but he was too young at the time to understand the spirit, and certainly the spirit could not disclose to him the wonderful things related to John Jr., who was, as the reader will learn, a man of intellect, courage, and indomitable willpower. I will include such parts of Richard Williams' manuscript as I think of value, editing and leaving out the things of least interest. Neither John Bell Jr. or John Bell spoke of the spirit as a witch, but as a spirit, which I shall designate it. The spirit made its final departure from the home of John Jr., assuring him it would return in 107 years. I've read articles in newspapers and heard from various sources that the witch would return in 100 years and that it was in the neighborhood for more than 50 years. The Bell family have regarded these statements as neighborhood witch tales. No member of the Bell family has seen or heard from the spirit since it bade John Jr. farewell in 1828. The author will not write voluminously on mentality, the human mind, the soul, spirit, and philosophy, but will adhere to the facts as nearly as possible, giving some reasons why these statements can be true in the light of scientific investigations, and why the Bells called the mystery a spirit. As to what kind of spirit, John Jr.'s attack on the spirit may give some insight. The author admits that he doesn't know the identity of this being, nor has he ever come in contact with any person who he believes knew anything more than it was a spirit. The fact that it came and remained for 4 years, then went away, returning as promised after 7 years, left again, and then promised to return after 107 years, and no one could say from whence it came or where it went, forces us to the conclusion that, whatever it was, we have never known of a greater mystery. And if its prophecies come true in the future, as they have during the past 100 years, then we have much yet of a spiritual nature to experience, which we have thought human beings would never know in this world. That time is very much nearer at hand than it was 50 years ago. Things are happening now that were foretold to John Bell Jr. by the Spirit. I believe after reading a real account of the Spirit's visit to the Bell homes, one must know it was not just superstition of the times. A person of reason likely would doubt that such a performance could have been carried on by a human being. Could it be so performed at the present time when we are so far advanced in sleight of hand, telepathy, and electricity? Think of the excitement it would create. What is being done now of a seeming supernatural act is not comparable to some things the Spirit did more than 100 years ago. John Jr. instructed his son, J.T. Bell, that he was not to disclose what was said in his conferences with the Spirit, but to pass it on to his son and on to succeeding generations until the time came when its publication would be of great value to the people of the country. On account of the depression from which so many thousands of our people are suffering now, and that so many church people are doubting the divinity of Jesus Christ, and that there is a heaven and a hell, all of which the Spirit foretold, and the fact that the Spirit said it would be back in the year 1935, I believe the reader will agree with me that my grandfather and father would both think that now would be the proper time to publish these recollections. The Spirit prophesies that the only way for the world's recovery would be by spiritual improvement. As to what citizens thought of the Spirit as an actual occurrence, I would only suggest that the reader may communicate with any descendant of the oldest Robertson County families. He will learn that for years the Spirit's visit was a most interesting subject of their thoughts and conversation. And to this day, I would be surprised if there could be found a grown citizen of that county who could not tell tales of the Bell Witch. A spirit is entirely separate from the material body. Therefore, some of the performances of the spirit that visited the Bells have always been completely mystifying. That it brought fruits to members of the family and did many other things that were of a material nature has baffled everyone who has attempted a solution. Simply saying that these things were impossible and likely the products of superstition does not solve out the mystery. And it's signed to the author, 304 Chapel Avenue, Nashville, Tennessee. And this book was written in 1930. So let's get cozy here. So this chapter is The Spirit Makes Its Appearance at the Bell Home. The Bell family lived the usual happy life of a large country family surrounded by everything the country afforded. Nothing of a disturbing nature occurred until they were firmly fixed in the attachment and confidence of their neighbors and friends. Some 12 or 15 years after their arrival in Tennessee, John Bell was going to the north end of the farm to look over the daily work and give such orders as necessary. He carried his rifle, thinking possibly to get a shot at a rabbit or a duck at the pond. As he passed the north end of the orchard, he saw a peculiar-looking animal sitting between two corn rows. It looked like a dog, yet on closer inspection, he couldn't determine to what species it belonged. He shot at the animal, which at once disappeared. A short time later, Drury and Betsy saw strange creatures for which they could not account, but as the country was new and so many different animals and birds were seen, they didn't attach much importance to what they saw. About this time, Betsy saw what she believed to be a woman strolling about the orchard. She spoke to her, but it had no answer, the apparition at once disappearing. Sometime after Betsy, Drury, and their father saw these apparitions on the farm, the family began hearing queer noises at the house, as if someone was knocking at the doors and windows. Also, as if wings were flapping against the ceilings. On opening the doors, nothing could be seen to cause these outside noises. Soon the noises became greater on the inside. The sounds in the bedrooms appeared to be such as would be heard if the beds were suddenly and roughly pulled apart, to which was added fighting dogs chained together, making a noise most deafening and exciting. Betsy and the boys were very much frightened. Their sister Esther was married and not at the Bell home at this time. When lights were flashed upon the scene, the noises ceased, and not a thing out of the way could be seen, nor had any damage been done to the furniture. These mild demonstrations continued for a year or more, increasing until the house fairly shook as if in a storm, and the noises could be heard at quite a distance. By command of John Bell, the family said nothing about these noises. At first, John Bell Jr. thought it might have been caused by the earthquaking, as there had been several quakes years earlier, but of course had ceased then. They knew, too, that they were the only people in the neighborhood whose home was so troubled. Had it been in general, they would have heard of it without asking. About this time, John Bell developed a peculiar illness which affected his tongue and the muscles of his jaws. Chewing and swallowing became difficult. This illness was attributed to the spirit at the time. No doubt it was a disease of the nervous system, which certainly may have been caused by the spirit, but not in a direct manner, as supposed. Simply, the continued annoyance had its effect on his nervous system. This disease in no way affected his thinking powers. He attended to his business and made financial deals as usual. At this time, he decided to seek counsel among his friends, hoping some suggestion from them might give him some relief. He asked one of his best friends, James Johnston, well known for his courage and Christianity, to come to his house and spend the night, telling him for the first time of the distressing condition. Mr. Johnston readily agreed to do all he could for him. He and his wife both came to pass the night in the Bell home. As usual, Mr. Johnston read a chapter from the Bible and prayed most earnestly for his friends in their time of trouble, after which he and his wife retired to the room adjoining Betsy's. Soon unheard of noises began, worse than ever, invading Mr. and Mrs. Johnston's room, stripping the covers off their bed, laughing loudly in a derisive tone, causing Mr. and Mrs. Johnston to become very much frightened. To all entreaties and demands for a reason for all this there was no answer as to why it was there or from whence it came. There was no reply but loud laughter. They all spent a sleepless night, and if possible were further from a solution of the mystery than before. Mr. Johnson advised John Bell to ask other friends' assistance in an attempt to fathom the source and cause of this uproar, to try to ascertain the motive for the demonstrations, which he agreed to do. There were selected a number of courageous and determined men, good friends of John Bell, who were almost constantly at his home from that time until the spirit left, striving in every way to induce this being to let it be known what it all meant. It continued the same actions as when Mr. and Mrs. Johnston spent the night at the Bell home. After a few nights, the spirit voluntarily began to talk for the first time, beginning in almost a whisper. The first real talking was a repetition of Mr. Johnston's prayer and a song given the first night he spent at the Bell home. So exact was this imitation, both in its repetition and sound of voice, it was said that no one could tell it from Mr. Johnston's voice. At this time, the being, uninvited, played the part of host at the Bell home, entertaining the neighbors and people from surrounding counties. As could be imagined, its reputation became greater every day. It assumed a pious character, apparently enjoying religious talks and quoting scripture fluently with absolute accuracy. No preacher of that day could successfully argue scripture with the spirit. It often corrected them in their interpretations of scriptural meanings, at times telling them of some differences in translations, pointing out what it insisted was the correct translations. No one could dispute very successfully these points. It joined in the singing at the weekly prayer services with a voice, the sweetness of which was unsurpassed. People were attracted from great distances to hear this singing. At times it sang songs never heard before in that country and never forgotten during the life of those who heard this wonderful singing. It prayed with great fervor and eloquence, causing persons who heard it to believe that the world was about to become much better. It must be understood that while the spirit was displaying all these accomplishments, members of the Bell family and the best minds of the times were not idle, but were doing all in their power to solve the mystery. They were certain there was no accomplice, that no human being was either instrumental or aiding an outside force, that the being was there and actually engaged in exhibitions causing both doubts and astonishments in this country and in England. Astonishments to those who witnessed the feats performed and doubts in the minds of those who only read or heard of it. No one who saw these actions and heard the spirit talk was ever known to doubt the existence of a supernatural being of some kind. As time passed, the spirit was very ready to let itself be known to visitors at some time during their stay, and a visitor was rarely, if ever, disappointed in being able to see and hear all that he wished. The spirit was active in its watchfulness of all events occurring in the neighborhood. Nothing was said or done of any moment that was not reported by the spirit, and at once became well known far and wide. Scratch my eyeball here. Under this espionage, that community rapidly became a model in everything demanded of good citizens. The spirit even knew the thoughts of those with whom it came in contact, and it did not hesitate to tell the evil thoughts of those so read at the Bell home. People came from hundreds of miles on horseback and in covered wagons to witness these feats. The guests were never charged a cent for board or lodging and were taken care of as long as the house would hold them. At length, these visitors, on account of numbers, brought tents and occupied them. Never at any time did the Bells and their friends, aided now by an occasional visitor from other states, cease their endeavors trying to discover what the spirit meant and what it was after. Finally, it did answer. "I am a spirit. I once was very happy, but have been disturbed. This was spoken in a voice quite distinct and understood by all present. Immediately after the spirit began talking, it asserted that it would remain and continue worrying John Bell, finally killing him, never explaining or giving any reason for this dislike. It never at any time cast any reflections upon John Bell's character or tried in any way to influence anyone to doubt his integrity, but continually reviled him and at times punished him so severely with blows and other physical methods. Joel, Betsy, and Richard Williams were also punished by having their hair pulled, their jaws slapped, leaving red finger marks on their faces. At none of these investigations were the real scientific persons who claimed they were going to expose the witch tricks overlooked by the spirit. They came in for a full punishment if they openly expressed doubts. Usually it followed these guests on their journey home for quite a distance, giving them final advice on the subject of witches and inviting them back when they felt they could solve the mystery. That's a sassy witch. Betsy, the younger daughter of John Bell, who had attended the neighborhood school, had many friends among the students. Her first sweetheart was one of her boy schoolmates, Joshua Gardner, a fine young fellow whose family was highly respected, but the spirit opposed the union of these young people. No one has ever known for what reason. Neither Betsy nor Joshua knew. The spirit became so abusive toward Betsy that she spent a great deal of time away from her home with her girlfriends. Richard Powell, the young man who taught the school, was a teacher of fine reputation and a good friend of the Bell family. He was so exceedingly worried that the Bell family was persecuted by the spirit. A full account of these two friends of Betsy's and her marriage to one will be given in the chapter devoted to Betsy and her trials. That the spirit was the controlling factor, Betsy was forced to acknowledge. No matter if she were away from home or with her girlfriends, the spirit followed her, nor did it forget those left at home, but continued the same actions, which had now assumed a more abusive character than before. Still religious, pious, and prayerful, but at times displaying a frightful temper with all of the family except Mrs. John Bell. Neither did it give John Jr. the same offensive treatment as it did the other sons. The spirit always declared Lucy Bell, John Bell's wife, the most perfect woman living, and never at any time displayed animosity toward her. It seemed to have a respectful regard for John Jr. While having sharp verbal encounters with him, it was never known to use physical force with him, and was always on the defensive when he was bitterly assailed. Never for a single time restraining himself, but with the short, stern language for which he was noted, he would quickly answer the spirit. On account of this great respect for John Jr.'s mighty intellect, courage, and sternness, the spirit told him many things it never uttered to others. It said it was telling him of future events and many past events for that reason, knowing that he would know how to use such information in the best way. John Jr. was placed in a position in which all history has no record of a duplication, yet he must have acted for the best interest of his family and the future generations of his countrymen. He formed his opinions of and divided the nature of this being in a most philosophical way. It would seem that he really forced the spirit to say the things told him in their conferences in verbal tilts. Never at any time did he show the least fear of the spirit, but always denounced it in the most abusive terms, designating it as a spirit of the damned, not asking what it was, simply assuming that no other spirit would perform such atrocious acts. About this time, a gentleman from England visited the Bell home, remaining several months with the expressed determination made known only to John Jr. of solving this mystery. As stated in previous chapters, the Bells were of English descent. However, this may not have been the cause of the visit. It was expressly understood that this visitor's name and residence were not to be made known by the family, which was readily agreed to. Strange to say, the spirit made no announcement to outsiders giving the identity of this gentleman, but did some extra performances apparently for his enlightenment, telling him he would have some real tales to write up on his return to England, and be sure to get it all straight. The gentleman was highly entertained and experienced such performances as would satisfy the most skeptical of the absolute supernatural powers displayed. During this time, at a Sunday night meeting at the Bell home, the spirit repeated the sermon of Reverend James Gunn, preached at Bethel Methodist Church, for the benefit of those who had not attended the morning services. Reverend Gunn was present, and his voice was imitated so that those present thought he must be talking. His text and prayers were given with exactness. He admitted to it to be so. Someone present said to the other preacher, Reverend Serg Fort, "Brother Fort, you have the advantage. Your sermon was not heard." The spirit began at once repeating Reverend Fort's sermon and prayers in his voice and exact words, giving out hymns, etc., and etc. Reverend Fort said it was all correct. This performance was so astonishing that it left all present and all who have heard of it since in complete mystery. The Englishman about this time was thinking in a most serious way of this and many other things he had heard the Spirit say. The Spirit told him of his thoughts, and that he was a sensible man to have remained, making no fuss and not saying the foolish things others had. It told him he was puzzled over things he had seen and heard, and it would now give him another to think about. It told him within 2 or 3 hours he would hear from home. As usual, the Spirit had kept him informed as to what was going on at his home in England all the time, which the Englishman always learned was true when he received letters from home, and asked him what he should tell the home folks, that it would convey any message to them he wished. This it had never done before. The Englishman said, "Tell them that, in my opinion, never since the world was created have man seen and heard the marvelous things I have witnessed during the past 3 months." Within 3 hours, a voice began repeating astonishment at what was being told them, and another voice exclaimed incredulously, "Why, that's Brother's voice! Where are you, Brother?" The Englishman told John Bell and John Jr., who were the only other persons present, that the voices were his mother's and brother's. This spirit had given a perfect imitation of their voices. The spirit then gave their return message in the voice of the mother. "Tell him not to stay any longer. He has heard and seen enough, and we don't want any more visits like that here." The Englishman knew his mother's voice, yet to prove conclusively that it was she, he wrote John Jr. as soon as he arrived home that all that had been said was correct, and that all who believed it were amazed, but few people believed it could actually have happened. John Jr.'s veracity was unquestionable, as will be seen in his recollections given to his son J.T. Bell. This incident actually occurred and was never told to any person other than to J.T. Bell, who was equally as silent on the subject of the Bell Witch. This Englishman saw and heard many things told of in the chapter devoted to the recollections of John Jr., and at no time after a thorough investigation did he doubt the supernatural origin of the manifestations exhibited. He went home carrying with him an experience which has been handed down in that country for generations and which will likely never be forgotten. If any of y'all are watching from England, do you know about the Bell Witch? Let me know in the comments. It's not known with certainty at this time who the Englishman was. John Jr.'s assurance was that he was a high-class man of great intelligence. Other visitors from Europe were at the Bell home during the stay of the spirit, but remained only a short time. None could offer further explanation than that it was a supernatural being, and no evidence other than to exclude a human being. Frank Miles, one of John Jr.'s best friends, who was one of the most powerful men physically living at that time, was ever ready to aid the Bell family. He was present at the death of John Bell. He was a man of some 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighed about 250 pounds, with no surplus flesh, had a grip with his hands that would crush an ordinary man's hand, could perform wonderful feats of strength, and was a man of undoubted courage. Mr. Miles, like his friend John Bell, did not hesitate to say if he would ever get the witch in his grip. He intended attempting to hold and crush it. Unlike John Jr., who knew it to be impossible to get a grip on the spirit, he made such attempts frequently while staying overnight at the Bell home. Mr. Miles related that on extremely cold nights, all the bed covers were quickly jerked off. The covers which he caught and held were torn wide apart and in pieces, leaving only small pieces in his hands. On 2 occasions, the bed tick was snatched from under him, and the bed rolled across the room by unseen force. He was unable to grasp the offender, but he said he felt the most forceful blows about his head and face he'd ever had, while the spirit kept up at a most exasperating laugh, telling him he was sure a strong man and could knock the wind out of the air, but not dangerous in a tussle with a spirit. Mr. Miles never faltered in attempting to be of assistance to the Bell family, and was present at many of the most interesting meetings when the spirit was present. To his dying day, he was uncertain as to what region the spirit came from, but he was certain that it was a spirit that could display great strength and yet not be seen. He was a good friend of Joshua Gardner and Richard Powell, and he thought of Betsy as a sister. He sympathized heartily with them, and time again repeated the heart-rending experiences of Betsy, which he personally saw, but could give her only the comfort of his presence and heartfelt admiration for her great courage and endurance. The author, when a small boy, heard Frank Miles tell of many performances of the Bell Witch which he had witnessed. So we've been at this for almost 40 minutes, my friend. So I'm going to stop for now because I could read the whole book to you. It's fascinating to me, and I hope that you found that fascinating too. I love a good spook story, and again, this is one of my favorites because it is from my childhood, and although I never experienced the Bell Witch myself, I always believed in it. And my family members, my great-grandmother and some great aunts and uncles, used to tell me stories about things that happened to them when they were children in a home that they lived in down in Waverly, Tennessee. So when it gets closer to Halloween, I'll share those with you. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know. I would love to talk more about this because, again, I find it so interesting. Y'all take good care, and I'll see you on the next video.